Today's video, I am going to tie up kind of my version of a deceiver. Now this is pretty well standard deceiver, but I have a little bit of peacock herl and then I add some flash to the body. So let's get started. I'm going to show you guys what we do. First thing first, I like a nickel coated 1/0 hook. Now you can tie these in all different sizes. The ones I'm tying right now are on a 1/0 because they're going to be for larger bass. Now the materials we're going to use, we are going to use some peacock herl. We want it to be about 5 inches long. We are going to use some bucktail, white bucktail. We're going to use some white hackle. We're going to use some pearl crystal flash. The thread I'm using is a 210 denier thread. And then I'm going to use some medium white crystal chenille. I'm going to use some super glue that is a gel based super glue. I'm going to use some little bitty stick eyes, and I'm going to use some UV cement. So let's get this thing started. First thing first, we're going to wrap our base. Now I'm going to leave excuse me, about 1/3 of the hook open right behind the eye. I'm not going to tie on right there, and I'm going to make some loose wraps going down to the shaft of the hook. Now when I get to the back of the hook where my thread drops real close to where that barb is, I'm going to stop right there. This is going to be my tie-in point for my hackle. Now my hackle I'm going to want tied in, so I'm going to make a bump. You'll see right here I'm going to tie a bump in, and that's going to help hold that hackle in place. So I've tied my bump in. So now on my hackle I'm going to take and I'm going to use some of the longer feathers at the tip of my hackle. Now I've measured from the eye of my hook back here is 5 inches, and I want this streamer to be about 5 inches. So that is what I'm going to do. Now I have 4 hackle feathers right here. I'm going to use 4 hackle feathers, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2, I'm going to take the other 2, and I'm going to put them on each other, both going in the same directions, and then I'm going to put them against each other. So I have 2 facing each way, and I'm going to stick these hackle feathers to where they reach towards that back to where I get my 5-inch mark, and I'm going to tie them in right on top of that bump with my thread towards the eye of the hook in front of that bump to where that bump is really securing them in, and that'll help hold them in place to where they're not going to be able to fall off. So once I cut them out of the place, I'm going to tie that in really good to where they're not going anywhere. Now, most all bait fish have a lateral line, so I am going to take and make a lateral line on this fly out of some flash. So what I've got is I've got some of my crystal flash. I'm going to cut probably 4 or 5 strands at once, and I'm going to tie on each side. Now these things will slip out, so tie them a little long and tie them in pretty good. Once you get them tied in, you can cut them front pieces off and then pull them to where they're about as long as the feathers and cut them off. Now I'm going to do the top part the same way. So I'm going to grab 4 or 5 strands again, and I'm going to tie them on the other side just as I did the front side. Okay, so once I get them tied in, I'm going to cut all the danglies. I'm going to pull them to where they're about the same size as the hackle, and now I've got them all tied in place. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my chenille. I'm going to bring my thread forward, and I'm again going to leave this third portion of the hook shaft empty for I have tie-in room. Now this, I use a black thread. I just always have, and it gives a cool look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap that chenille over my black thread base pretty tight, but it's still going to bleed through just a little bit, and it really gives a natural body look. Now the bucktail is going to cover part of this, but trust me, it still shows through, and I think this difference really helps. It gives it a very natural bait fish look. So once I get that to that mark where I've got about 1/3 of the hook left, I'm going to tie it in. Now I'm going to take my bucktail, and I want my bucktail to go about halfway through here. And again, on the back of my vise, I've taken a marker and I've marked a spot to where I can be consistent on my size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to grab that bucktail in pieces about the size of like a pencil. And I'm going to cut them off. Once I get them cut off, you'll see I'll just kind of start pulling the little loose fibers out. And I'm going to hold this about to the point where I want it, which is going to be about the halfway point of the hackle. Once I do that, I'm going to mark it with this finger. Now, this is kind of an important deal. When I cut my stuff, I'm not going to cut it this way. I'm actually cut it towards my fingers, and that keeps it tight. So I'm going to cut that off at a little bit of an angle. And when I do that, it keeps it tight. So now I'm going to make sure that all them fibers are behind the eye of the hook. And I'm going to make a loose wrap, a couple loose wraps. Then I'm going to tie it in fairly tight. Once I get that tied in place, I'm just going to spin it around the hook a little bit. And that is going to be that side facing forward to you guys. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to get another piece of bucktail. Get all that loose stuff out of the way. And I'm going to hold it to where I'm about the same size. Again, taking my scissors right next to my fingers and cutting at an angle. I'm going to lay these pieces in place and do the exact same thing for the opposite side. Now, when you cut at that angle, you want to make dang sure that you're tying far enough back that these bucktail fibers are not coming out. So once I get that in place, I'm going to spin that one towards the side as well. So now I've got my sides pretty well nice and covered. So now I want to do a top. Again, you can see how sometimes you'll get just a whole bunch of stragglers. So just kind of clump it in your fingers and just pull all the loose, anything loose that comes out. There'll be a bunch of little fibers that come out. And then do the same thing the other way. Again, holding it to where I'm about the same proportions. Cutting it right next to my fingers at that angle. And once I get that set down, I'm going to set that on top. I'm going to tie that in nice and tight on the top. Once I get that tight, I'm going to kind of spin it all around and make it to where it's pretty even everywhere. Now, excuse me, I'm going to take 4 of these peacock herls. I kind of like want to use straight good ones. Some of these will get bent pretty good. So, and just pull 4 or 5. Doesn't really matter. And I'm going to sit them right on top. When I get them on top, I'm going to tie them in. Once I get them tied in place, I'll trim them out. Again, kind of back where they're about the same length as the hackle. Now I've got that part done. I'm going to just tie in a head. And I pretty much want to cover up all of the bucktail fibers that I get, but I don't want to crowd the eye of the hook too much. I want my head to be tapered up. So I'm just going to wrap my thread over up. Now, I don't build a great big head. I just get everything kind of secured up and I want it tapered. And then I'm going to whip finish. If you follow me, you know I whip finish everything twice. On this one, it's actually really unnecessary to do that, but it's just a good habit to get into. So I've got it whip finished and everything is ready to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to turn this one way. And I'm going to use just a little dab of super glue. Now I use a gel super glue. And I'm talking just a drop. So I've got just my little drop there on that side. Once I get that on that side, I'm going to pick my eye off. And I'm going to sit it in that super glue. Right where I want it. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to do the same thing on the next side. 1 drop of super glue. Got super glue on my container and put that to the side. Okay, so now I'm going to take my eye. I'm going to do the same thing. Now when you put these eyes in, I see a lot of guys who take and squeeze both sides, and I tend to get super glue on my fingers here and there, so I make sure I do one at a time, because if not, you'll poke your finger on the other one and it'll stick to it and you'll be done. So now the finishing of this, I use, as far as I'm concerned, the best UV glue there is. And this is the UV Clear Fly Finish Flow from Loon. This stuff is amazing. I'm going to take and I'm going to drip this all over my whole thread base, behind my eyes, a little on top of my eyes, and you'll see it wants to drip down, which is really good. So I'm going to let it kind of where it tries to drip, and as it does, I'm going to start blacklighting it. And as I spin it around on my rotary vise, that keeps it nice and consistent. So now I know that is set. I'm going to do one more finish over it to build my head up just a little bit more. And I want this to go back onto my bucktail just a little bit. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. Like a 1/16 of an inch or so. And I find it very important to go over the eyes with this, because it just kind of helps seal them in place. And this is going to be fished with some pretty aggressive fish, so we want this thing pretty durable. So I just take and run it under my black light, making sure I got all sides. And that is it, guys. This is a great fish for saltwater, for bass, any kind of predator fish. You can also make this, you know, where on that top piece you use chartreuse. You can use different color feathers. Make this in a million bait fish patterns, and this thing works. And I don't know what it is about the peacock herl, but it just gives it a really natural look. And this thing is a fishingest lure there is. So you guys, I hope this helps, and I will see you guys in the next video.